So these big questions he's asking, right? He's saying, you can teach me how much I have. You can teach me how much I need, to own in order to have power and to order to have wealth and accumulation. But what I really want to know is how much is enough. These bigger questions that he's asking here is what he's referring to in that very beginning thesis, our quote unquote real work here on earth, right? And that is what he's pointing to again and again in these comparisons. And he says, what is to be gained with this sort of knowledge? Am I supposed to feel anxious? And now he's talking about astronomy, right? He's saying we look up at the stars, and for millennia, for centuries, people have been looking at the stars and trying to measure this and when this planet is coming back and what it means when this one is out of phase and this thing. And he says, this is all fixed. He says, they are swept on a path, these celestial objects from which they cannot escape. Their motion is governed by an uninterrupted sequence of destined events, making their cycles fixed. They either actuate or signalize all that comes about in the universe. And if every event is brought about by them, then how is just familiarity going to help us in any way? Right? And so he's saying, what difference does it make to be aware in advance of things we cannot escape? He's talking about astrology, right? Of prophecy, trying to predict that which we are fated to encounter anyway. He says they are going to happen whether you know about them or not. What kind of anxiety you're trying to create in me to be anxious about things to come. That's not what our real work here is about worry, about anxiety, about accumulation. And he says, so we don't, in fact, gain anything from liberal studies. And now he's kind of having this dialogue with himself to teach you, right? He says, as far as character is concerned, a man's character, a woman's character, no, we don't gain anything from liberal studies that helps us become better people, but we gain a good deal from them in other directions, right? And what does he mean by that? Well, let's go to the next page here. He says, why then do we give our sons a liberal education? Not because it can make them morally good, but because it prepares the mind for the acquisition of moral values. Just as grounding in grammar, right? When you learn the alphabet, in which boys are given their elementary schooling, does not teach them liberal arts, but prepares them for the knowledge that's going to come to them, right? We need to learn the alphabet in order to read poetry, something that's might change our lives, or to read a sacred text like the Popol Vuh or the Bible or the Torah. When it comes to character, the liberal arts open the way to it rather than carry the personality all the way there. So it is an opening. Now, what I want to point you to here is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just to kind of give you a sense of what Seneca is going to refer to, because he's going to talk about the connection between morality and poverty in a second. At the very beginning of our needs, we have these physiological needs. Physiological means mind and body in one. So we need food, we need water, we need warmth, we need rest. Just because of the types of living creatures we are, we have to sustain ourselves as live beings, okay? Once we are able to live, then we also have to secure these things for ourselves. We need a stable food supply, a stable water supply, a stable shelter, and a stable place to sleep. So this security and safety is very important. Once we are secured with our basic needs, we then have these relational needs that come about because humans are born in relation to each other. We need other people. We need intimate relationships. We need friendships. We need even some esteem. We need a feeling of accomplishment. People like to feel like they are growing and thriving and developing and becoming better and smarter in life. And once we have these psychological needs met, then we have these self-fulfillment needs, the achieving of one's full potential, or creative activities, whatever else we are able to self-actualize, reaching our full potential. But we cannot get to the pinnacle of this without sustaining ourselves first. And that's exactly what Seneca is referring to here. We need that foundation. Now, here in the next paragraph, he says, in this connection, I feel prompted to take a look at individual qualities of character. I love the way Seneca defines these qualities of character. Okay, he says that bravery is one which treats with contempt things that ordinarily inspire fear, despising and defying and demolishing all the things that terrify us and set chains on us. Now, look at how bravery, he's not talking about bravery as far as running into a burning building. He's talking about the ability of a man to stand on his own in confidence. Okay, secondly, loyalty, he says, the most sacred sacred quality that can be found in the human breast, never corrupted, never driven to betray. Okay. And then he says self-control is the quality which takes command of the pleasures, that self-discipline, that mastery that Newman and Shinsu talked about that we need as the gentleman that they both set up, that person in complete control of him and herself. And humanity, the quality which stops one being arrogant towards another person. And I just love the way he says that in words, in actions, in emotions, humanity reveals herself as kind and good-natured to all. And he says, does liberal studies inculcate any of these attitudes? No. Liberal studies, university education does not really help you to become brave or loyal or have self-control or be more humane, no more than it helps you in these other characteristics he lists: simplicity, modesty, restraint, frugality, thrift, mercy. And I love the way he defines mercy here. Mercy is able to look at the idea that it is not for man to make waste of man. Right? That is not our right in life, is to decide who lives or dies. That is not for man to decide against man. And so he says, okay, so then someone will ask me then how liberal studies is, if it's of no help to morality, then how can I say that there is no attaining morality without them? And he answers here very plainly. He says there's no attaining morality without food either. But there's also no connection between morality and food. And if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, if I have no bread to feed my family, I don't care about stealing bread from a store. Right? If I need to feed the people I love and who depend on me, then there is no morality for me, because I will do whatever it takes to survive. And that is exactly what Seneca is saying here. There is no attaining this kind of morality without food. But we don't make a connection between morality and food all the time. Right? He says there's no reason for you to assume that X being something without Y could never come about. Right? And indeed, it can actually be argued that the attainment of wisdom is perfectly possible without liberal studies. We know many people that have no university education and are very wise, although moral values are things that have to be learnt. They are not learned through these studies. Morality is taught to us from very young age all the way through our old age. Besides, what grounds could I possibly have for supposing that a person has no acquaintance with books will never be a wise man again? Wisdom does not lie in books. Wisdom publishes not words, but truths. Truth can come through experience in life. Truth can come even to people who are illiterate. We can understand through experience what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. And he says, and I'm not sure that memory isn't even more reliable when we do not have external aids to fall back on. And then he comes back to wisdom, that wisdom is in fact the greatest thing. And he says wisdom is something calling for a lot of room to move. You have to dispel distraction from your mind. You have to dispel nonsense. You have to dispel this curiosity over gossip and information about other people. None of these things which serves you, because if you want to be a wise person, your brain needs a lot of space for wisdom to move. And if any of you know about Proverbs 8 is also titled Wisdom's Call. And it's a whole chapter in Proverbs that talks about the characteristics of wisdom. And I encourage you to look at that, because the similarities between what Seneca is saying and what Proverbs is saying about wisdom is very parallel to each other. And he talks about where wisdom began. Did it begin with the universe? There's countless questions about the soul, and this is the real work he's talking about right here. Where does the soul come from? What is its nature? When did it begin to exist? How long does it exist? Does the soul pass from one place to another, moving house? Does it transfer from one creature to another? Right? What about time? He comes to time and says the idea of time is amazing, right? Just the ideas alone of whatever field of physical or moral sciences you deal with, you'll be given no rest by the amazing things that we can learn and investigate by just starting to ponder things that are beyond us, things that we don't think about every day, but that we should. Seneca is saying we are wasting our time on measuring things that are very practical and tactile in our world. Our real work here, if we are creatures of the soul and not merely the flesh, is let's think about these bigger things things, these higher things. And he says, to enable matters of this range and scale and to find unrestricted hospitality in our minds, everything superfluous must be turned out, everything useless, everything unnecessary, because virtue will not bring herself to enter the limited space we offer her. Something of great size requires plenty of room, and so let everything else be evicted and let your heart be opened to her. And that is very important. And that is kind of like a meditation, right? When people who meditate, they talk about the idea of, clearing out your mind to allow things to kind of reign free. And he's going to start talking about philosophies. And the reason why I titled the heading of this as the kind of frustration of reading and believing is because as you go through college, you are going to be introduced to so many amazing new ideas. College students get introduced to the Greek philosophy, to Chinese philosophy, to the German philosophy like Nietzsche and Freud, and all of these different and new ideas, Marxist philosophy, we're talking about Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. And all of these new ideas are going to really start to be attractive to you because they're going to be new, they're going to be different, they're going to make sense to you on different levels. And what he's going to talk about here at the end is he's going to say, a lot of this stuff that we're learning, the study of these philosophies, a lot of them are a waste of time. A lot of them disagree with each other. And as you get to be more studied and as you get to have graduate work, you will first start to feel frustrated because what one philosopher says will be immediately contradicted by the next. And yet you will be tempted to believe in both. You will have an attraction to both. And then the more you study, you will say, well, wait a minute, all of these different philosophies disagree. And if I know anything about truth, then I know that they can't all be right because they are all contradicting each other. So how can they all be right if they're all disagreeing with what one to the other says, right? And also, how am I to trust what one philosopher says over the other? How do I really know? And he kind of gives this really funny, his own kind of a take on this. He says, to want to know more than is sufficient. And again, he's pointing back to what is enough for a person, right, is a form of intemperance. He says, apart from which this kind of obsession with liberal arts turns people into pedantic, irritating, tactless, self-satisfied bores. And honestly, what he's referring to is professors here. He's talking about us. He's talking about the professors who are teaching these kinds of things, kind of just we love to hear ourselves talk. We kind of just roll on about this philosophy, about that theory, on and on and on, just because we have the tendency to become these pedantic, irritating, tactless, and self-satisfied, really satisfied with ourselves and boring everybody else, not learning what we need simply because we spend time learning things we will never need. And this is very typical of Seneca's tone and humor here. He refers to the scholar Didymus, and he says, scholar Didymus wrote 4,000 works. And he writes, I should feel sorry for him if he had merely read so many useless works. In these works, he discusses such questions as Homer's origin, or who was Aeneas's real mother, whether Anacreon's manner of life was more of a lecher of a drunk, or whether Sappho slept with anyone who asked her, or other things that would be better unlearned if one actually knew them. We as scholars have a tendency to go into the nitty-gritty of things, to start to look at the definitions of this, the original linguistic root of this. And he's saying, what is the point of this? Isn't the real point of understanding knowledge the greater perspective, the greater picture, pointing back to our real work? Do we really have to measure the difference between the use of an A or an E or an I in the different spellings as it's evolved in this one word? He makes sense in here, and he's saying, what are we really studying? And he says, don't you go and tell me that life is long enough for this kind of thing. When you come to writers in our own school, for that matter, he's talking about the Stoics, I'll show you plenty of works which could do with some ruthless pruning, right? It costs a person an enormous amount of time, and other people's ears an enormous amount of boredom, before he earns such compliments as, what a learned person. So let's be content with the much less fashionable label, what a good man. right? We as scholars and academics and even as students have to start to say, how much do I need to know and what do I need to know? What is really important at the end of the day? How much I know or how much I am doing with what I know, right? Remember what Shin Tzu says, the gentleman is just different from other men because he makes good use of things. Newman said that as well. It is the usefulness of what you know, how to make use